This is Point Blank with Sam Kephart, the power of candor in an age of deceit. Sam, nice to see you. How's everything?
Good. It's very good. I'm up here in Spearfish today, and we have fall upon us. However, it's today it's almost 70 and sunny, so it's actually a nice day.
Good. Okay. What we want to do is talk about a couple of items and have you give us some insight, if you would. One of the first things we want to look at is, what do you see, Sam, as the most pressing issues in our world today?
Well, I think there's several. Obviously, the most significant is the American election at the moment. But other than that, we have a global financial crisis, quite frankly, that is persisting and has persisted since 2007, 2008. We have the war in Syria and a potential breakout of hostilities directly with Russia, and a potential for World War III, and I'm not teasing about that. And then we have dynamic shifting in the Far East. China is beginning to feel its oats after the huge transfer of wealth that's come from America to China. And 70% of the world's, we'll get to it here in a few minutes, but 70% of the world's high-value freight goes through the South China Sea. And essentially, China is now wanting to establish its hegemony all over the Western South Pacific. And it could be a problem also. But the biggest thing I would say right now is the election here and what that portends, and the financial crisis of 07, 08, the derivatives that were never dealt with.
So, Sam, let's shift over to the Syrian war, and maybe you can give us some of your perspective about what is the real underlying cause of the Syrian war. Give me just a little background, and then bring me up to date today, and then what you see going on from this day forward.
Well, there's several things. First of all, the Middle East, typically since the end of World War II, has been run by most of the countries over there, either royalty families like Saudi Arabia and Jordan and some other places, or military or political dictators. And frankly, it was reasonably stable, at least where they had non-sectarian leaders. And that certainly was the case in Iraq. That certainly is the case in Syria. Syria is a Muslim country, but Assad basically lets Christians, Jews, and both Sunni and Shia Muslims practice their religions peacefully. Well, along comes the United States, and we'll get into the reasons why, but they basically get into this whole thing about regime change and toppling the governments and leadership in the Middle East. We've had several toppled, both under the Bush the second administration, and then of course the Obama administration, and now potentially Hillary Clinton's administration. And the issue is that none of them have been a success. So why do we keep wanting to topple? Well, there's two reasons. The neocons, which are the people we call the military-industrial complex, and the folks that are in favor of that. Essentially, the neocons are a group of politicians. You can see McCain, Lindsey Graham, Hillary there. There's a bunch of other people. The woman who's our ambassador to the United Nations is down in the lower right-hand corner. Susan Rice, right behind her. These people all basically want to have a state of perpetual war in the Middle East because of two reasons. Number one, obviously, it's good for the banks and the big business people, particularly the vendors who supply war materiel. And then most importantly is Wall Street and the international bankers, because it creates a lot of debt that they make money on, because the US government sells bonds and treasury notes to pay for the debt that covers the cost of the war. We never collect it from the people we're supposedly trying to protect or overpower. And then it also is used as a cover for the malfeasance that was done in the derivatives run-up. Now, we all, get fussed up about the derivatives of '07, '08. Well, the reality of it is there's now about 7 or 8 times the number of derivatives now that there was in '07, '08. So they need an even bigger cover for the mess that they're creating. And that's number one. Number two, currently and for many years, Russia has legitimately supplied natural gas, accounting for about 35 to 40% of Western Europe's usage, particularly Italy, France, those areas, the more eastern part of Western Europe. And so their Russian natural gas is a major source of supply. And of course, all those people are NATO members. Well, now, because of the US, the NATO, and the neocons wanting to squeeze Putin and have regime change in Russia, they now want to build a competing pipeline to cut off his business and basically take away his cash flow. So the blue line represents the new pipeline. The red line represents the Russia-backed pipeline. Well, you can see the nexus of the two pipelines is in Syria. So all this horse shit about ISIS, and it's a very confusing situation, and it's meant to be. The core issue is that the Western nations and NATO and the neocons want to topple Assad. They want to fuck him in the ass and throw him over and then get to build the pipeline and basically have control of that access for the natural gas. Plus, it's a big excuse then to issue even more bonds and cover over the whole derivatives mess. Now, you've never seen this graphic on network news, and you have to ask yourself why. Well, the why is basically the major news stations in the world are owned by 6 companies, and they're all controlled by the globalists and the New World Order and the shadow government. It ain't rocket science. And I can't believe the stupidity of most people. They are so lazy, they won't do the research.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about the current status of the global financial system, if you would, Sam.
Yeah. We talked about the derivatives and what was going on there. This graph is very informative. Now, 15 trillion, just to make it plain to everybody, a trillion is 1,000 billion. You with me? So that's 15,000 billion is ostensibly the money supply, the number of dollars sloshing around. 50 trillion is the world domestic product, which means all the goods and services, if we add those all up, that most of the known world sells and buys, that's the approximate value of their actual output. What are they producing and consuming? 100 trillion is the size of the global stock and bond market. And now we have the derivatives, which essentially are financial bets, predominantly run out of New York, Wall Street, and London, the city. That's what they call their Wall Street, is the city. And I want you to look at the scope of that. So basically, you have derivatives which are bets, they're like casino bets, that are 10 times the entire output of the world's GDP. It's insanity. And this is the reason, one of the underlying reasons for the current debt crisis and for all these wars. They have to keep doing funny money and cover over and cover up so they can keep kicking the can down the street rather than deal with this and have it called out for what it is. And it just boggles my mind that people can't see it. There's nothing here that's magical. This is all stuff that's researchable. Anyone who has a computer or a smartphone and a little bit of time can go to free sources and determine all this. There's nothing that I'm sharing here that's A, not accurate, or B, someone else can't do. But for whatever reason, the American public and certainly the global public is just sound asleep here, Eddie, and it's a disgrace.
Talk about, Sam, a little bit about the immigrant crisis in the European nations and in the United States, and how that's affecting the direction we're going, and what sort of problems are underlying those issues.
Well, the key thing to bear in mind with the migrant issue, as they call it in Europe, or we call the immigrant issue, this happens to be a picture from the south of France, and these are some African Muslim immigrants that are camped out on the rocky beach side. That's the Mediterranean, and obviously some pretty nice condos in the background that you see there. And our illegal immigrant program, it is intentional. What people aren't realizing, Ed, is that the immigrants are being brought in intentionally to dilute and challenge the resident culture of the countries they're going into. That's one of the main issues, certainly with Muslim immigrants. I'm not saying some Muslims don't integrate or assimilate. Many do not, even here in the United States. And their stronger religious beliefs are antithetical to Judeo-Christianity. It goes back to Bible times, and it's, the Abrahamic inheritance. And basically, the Muslims feel that Ishmael, the Ishmaeli line, is their inheritance and is the right religion. And of course, the Jews and the Christians, have a different line coming out of Abraham. So you have a built-in conflict that's going on, and I don't see it being easily resolved. In Europe, they're ahead of us in terms of being down the toilet culturally, because there's some 1.5 million or 2 million migrants from the Middle East that have come in there over the last year or two. And it is patently clear from any of the news reports and anybody that lives there that these folks are not being assimilated. The social costs are huge, and they're causing problems. Women are being raped, people are being burglarized or robbed. I have a acquaintance of mine who is a German undercover policeman, and he came out of a bank a few months ago. I don't remember what city, it might have been Berlin, but one of the major cities. And some migrant tried to hold him up, and he had two choices. He could try to arrest the guy or just beat the crap out of him, and he just beat him to a pulp and left him on the sidewalk, hoping that would teach him a lesson. But the point is, it's much worse than we're being told, and my concern is that this is now coming and going to be coming to the United States, and people really need to wake up to it. And it doesn't mean I'm anti-cultural or anti-anything. There are no checks on this right now. And I think we do have to have very strict border controls and very strict vetting of anybody that wants to come here. In terms of the people that are already here, I think at least they need to be strongly vetted. And somehow we need to look at a system for either getting them out and bringing them back legally, or working them into the line because they basically jumped the line to get in here. There has to be a better way to do that. Now, in the early to mid 60s, there was a program that ran in California and Texas and Arizona to some degree that was called Bracero, B-R-A-C-E-R-O, the Bracero program. Well, I think it's high time that we have an e-Bracero, like electronic Bracero program, where people would be given a bio-identification card, and they would have permission to come back and forth across the border to A, work, B, pay taxes, C, get access to certain social services that would be contracted for as part of their coming across and being a guest worker, and put some controls over it. Right now, we have a big mess with no controls. And I just think it's already a huge problem in Europe, and it's going to be a bigger one here. We're just, a year or two behind them.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break here, and we'll be right back with Sam Kephart and Point Blank, the power of candor in an age of deceit.